The Greenbrier Ghost. In the hills near Raynell, West Virginia, the house that once belonged to Mary Jane Heaster still stands, tucked into the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains. Over a century ago, something happened there that would eventually lead to a murder trial unlike any other in American history. It wasn't just the death of Zona Heaster Shue that caught people's attention, but it was the way her mother claimed the truth came to light. This case became known as the story of the Greenbrier Ghost. Zona had married a blacksmith named Edward Shue in 1896. He was a tall man with a strong build who worked at James Cruikshank's blacksmith shop in Greenbrier County. People didn't know much about his past at the time, but it later came out that he'd already been married twice before. Both of those wives had died, but nobody had looked into those deaths closely. Zona and Shue settled into a small two-story house not long after the wedding. From the outside, their life seemed normal. But in early January of 1897, Zona fell ill. Dr. J.M. Knapp came to treat her and made regular visits for several weeks. Shue appeared to be taking good care of her. At least, that's how it looked. On the morning of January 22nd, Shue asked Martha Jones if her son Anderson could come help his wife with chores. He came back several times trying to get the boy to go, but Anderson was busy. Around 1 p.m., he finally agreed. Anderson said he felt something was off the moment he approached the house. The doors were closed and it was quiet in a way that made him uneasy. As he stepped up, he saw a thin trail of blood on the porch. He followed it into the kitchen, through to the dining room, and there he found Zona's body on the floor. Her eyes were wide open, and as Anderson put it, it looked like she was laughing. He ran for help, and when Dr. Knapp and others arrived, Shue was already at the house. He had taken Zona's body and placed it in bed, holding her head close, crying and praying. He wouldn't let anyone touch her neck or look too closely. He also dressed her himself, choosing a stiff, high-collared dress and wrapping a scarf around her throat. It struck people as odd, but no one challenged it at the time. Dr. Knapp gave in and said it must have been heart failure. Zona was buried soon after, but her mother, Mary Heaster, never accepted that explanation. She had been disturbed from the beginning. Shue's behavior didn't sit right with her, and she started praying for answers. That's when the visits began. Mary said her daughter came to her 4 nights in a row, not in dreams, but in moments when she was fully awake. Zona described what had happened in detail. She said her husband had come home angry, complaining about the supper she'd made. He had expected meat, and when she said there were plenty of other things on the table, he flew into a rage. He grabbed her by the sides of her head and with one sudden motion, snapped her neck. Zona also described the home, including things her mother had never seen. She mentioned a spot behind a loose plank in the cellar, pointed out certain corners of the house, and even gave details about the land around it. Later, when Mary saw the place for herself, it was exactly as her daughter had said. At first, Mary's story was dismissed. People thought it was the result of grief, nothing more. But over time, others began remembering how strange Shue had acted after Zona's death. He had never let anyone near her body, even during the wake. He always stayed by her head as if guarding something. That started to bother people. Eventually, Mary and her brother-in-law went to see the prosecuting attorney, John Preston. At first, Preston didn't take them seriously, but after hearing the full story and talking to people in the community, he decided to look deeper. He spoke with Dr. Knapp, who admitted that Shue had prevented a full examination of Zona's body. Together, they agreed to order an exhumation and autopsy. When they told Shue, he protested but didn't refuse. Zona's body was then taken to a local schoolhouse for examination. Shue sat there the whole time, quietly whittling on a wooden box. Dr. Knapp worked for 3 days. On the 3rd day, he found the cause of death, a broken neck. The first vertebra had been completely dislocated. The break was so precise it had gone unnoticed for days. With that, Shu was arrested and charged with murder. He was taken to jail in Lewisburg to await trial. Word spread quickly, and soon the story of the ghost visitations became widely known. The trial began on June 30th, 1897, and the courtroom was filled with neighbors, some just wanting to hear what Zona's mother would say. The prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence, but they believed it was strong enough. Dr. Knapp testified about the injury and how it could not have been caused by accident or her taking her own life. Witnesses talked about Shu's actions too, his odd behavior, and how he dressed Zona in a way that concealed her neck. Eventually, Mary Heister took the stand. She described the 4 nights her daughter appeared and what she told her. She stuck to her story, and when the defense tried to say it was just dreams caused by grief, Mary pushed back. She said she was wide awake and what she saw was not imagined. Her calm, detailed answers left a strong impression. Shu tried to defend himself and talked for hours on the witness stand, denying the accusations and claiming it was all part of a grudge against him. He even admitted he had served time in the penitentiary before, but said he had loved Zona. His speech didn't help him though. If anything, it made him look worse. The jury didn't take long after that, and after an hour of deliberation, they returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. They recommended life in prison rather than the death penalty. Not everyone agreed with that, and a group of men even formed a mob and planned to hang Shu themselves. But a local man named George Hara warned the sheriff in time, and they were able to stop it. Shu was then sent to the Moundsville Penitentiary, where he died 8 years later. The Bell Witch. In the early years of the 1800s, John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to a quiet stretch of land along the Red River in Robertson County, Tennessee. It was a fertile place, good for farming and raising children, and soon enough the Bells settled into a large home, planted crops, and became part of the small but growing community. John Bell's success allowed him to expand the property to over 300 acres, and he took on a leadership role at the Red River Baptist Church, and he and his wife Lucy had more children after the move. For a time, life was pretty good. But in 1817, something happened that changed everything. John was out in his cornfield one day when he noticed an animal sitting between the rows. It wasn't anything he'd ever seen before. It had the body of a dog, and its head looked like that of a rabbit. Freaked out, he raised his gun and fired, but the creature ended up vanishing. That same night, the family began hearing loud knocks on the outside walls of their cabin. At first, they thought it was just, probably a prank. But the sounds returned the next night, and the one after that, growing louder and more persistent. The children started to complain too about rats gnawing at their bedposts, though no rats were ever found. Their bed covers were pulled off during the night as well, and pillows were tossed across the room. The Bells tried to dismiss all this, but the activity kept growing worse. Before long, they heard faint whispering. At first, it was hard to make out, but eventually it sounded like a woman quietly singing church hymns. Their youngest daughter, Betsy, became a target. She was slapped, had her hair pulled, and woke up with bruises and welts. These weren't small annoyances either, they were the kind of wounds you'd expect from someone being attacked. At first, John Bell told no one outside the family, but when the attacks didn't stop, he confided in a close neighbor named James Johnston. James and his wife agreed to spend the night at the Bell home. Everything was quiet until they went to bed. Then, just like the Bells described, the covers were pulled off and James was struck across the face. He stood up and demanded the spirit identify itself, but got no reply. The rest of the night passed in silence. The next morning, James told John that he believed it was a spirit, something that, in his words, the Bible warned about. The voice that once whispered hymns became louder and clearer. It was quoting the Bible, held conversations, and even repeated 2 sermons word for word, sermons that had taken place at the same time in churches 13 miles apart. Following all this, people began talking. Word spread through the community and eventually reached Nashville. Even Andrew Jackson, who had fought alongside the Bell Sons during the War of 1812, heard about it. Fast forward to 1819, Jackson came to Robertson County with a group of men to see the haunting for himself. As they approached the Bell property, their wagon stopped suddenly in a shallow creek, refusing to budge. The horses strained but wouldn't move. Then, following this, a woman's voice, unseen, told them they could go on, and the wagon moved as if nothing had happened. That evening, Jackson and his men stayed on the Bell property. One of his companions claimed to be able to fight off spirits with a silver bullet. He had barely finished making this claim when he began thrashing around, yelling that he was being stabbed with pins. It said that something kicked him so hard too that he flew out the door. The voice then warned that someone else among Jackson's men was a fraud and promised to expose him the next night. But the group didn't stay long enough to figure out who. Though Jackson had insisted on remaining, he and his men were seen riding out of town early the next morning. Even after Jackson left, the entity still remained. It became increasingly hostile towards John Bell, whom it called Old Jack. John began suffering from strange symptoms, being facial twitches, trouble swallowing, and eventually seizures. Whenever he tried to walk, his shoes were pulled off. The voice would also curse at him relentlessly. By late 1820, his condition had worsened so much that he rarely left his bed. Then, on December 19th, John slipped into a coma. The next morning, he was gone. After his death, the family found a small bottle of dark liquid in a cupboard. No one knew what it was, and John Jr. tested it on the household cat. The cat died instantly. The voice announced that she had given John a dose the night before, claiming responsibility for his death. John Jr. then threw the bottle into the fire, where it burned with a bright blue flame and vanished up the chimney. Thereafter, John Bell's funeral drew a crowd from miles away. 3 preachers, who consisted of 2 Methodists and 1 Baptist, spoke over his grave. As mourners left the cemetery, the voice returned one last time, singing loudly until the last person was gone. Though the attacks ended up fading, Betsy Bell still suffered the spirit's interference. She had become engaged to a young man named Joshua Gardner. Both families approved, and the couple looked forward to their future. But the spirit had other plans. It warned Betsy never to marry Joshua and harassed her constantly whenever they were together, whether it was in the fields, by the river, or near the cave on the property. Eventually, the pressure became too much and Betsy ended the engagement. There was also another man involved, who was Betsy's former school teacher, Richard Powell. He had shown a quiet but consistent interest in Betsy and was noticeably disappointed by her engagement. Some accounts say Powell dabbled in things like ventriloquism or the occult. Others suggest he simply waited patiently, knowing the relationship wouldn't last. Either way, he remained in the background and the spirit's focus eventually shifted. After the broken engagement, the spirit told Lucy Bell it would leave, but would return in 7 years. In 1828, it kept its word. This time, it focused on John Bell Jr., and they spoke about religion, war, and the future of civilization. The spirit made predictions too, some of which came true while others didn't. After 3 weeks, it said goodbye once more, promising to return in 107 years to visit John Bell's closest living descendant. That year would have been 1935. Dr. Charles Bailey Bell, a physician in Nashville and John Bell's great-grandson, was the man believed to be the next in line. In 1934, Dr. Bell published a book about the legend, which included new details supposedly passed down to him by his father. But there was no record of a return visit from the spirit. Some believe it never showed up, while others believe it never left. The Legend of Daniel Keith. In Rutherfordton, North Carolina, back in 1880, a brutal murder turned the quiet mountain town upside down. An 8-year-old girl had been found dead near her home, tragically beaten with a rock. The people were horrified, and within a short time, a name was on everyone's lips: Daniel Keith. Dan wasn't someone who blended in. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, broad, strong, with a red beard and fists the size of hams. He wasn't known for being friendly either, and while he mostly kept to himself, when he did drink, folks said he could get loud. That was enough to make people wary of him even before anything had happened. When someone claimed they saw him near the girl's house the day she was killed and mentioned he'd been drinking, that was all the town needed. Sheriff N.E. Walker didn't ask many questions. He went straight to Dan's place and found a blood-stained shirt hanging over the back porch rail. Dan told him it was from cleaning rabbits, but there was no way to prove it. He was then arrested without a fight, still thinking the truth would come out in time. Dan then spent months in a jail cell along the south wall of the building, swearing his innocence to anyone who'd listen. He shouted loud enough for folks in the street to hear him say he hadn't killed anyone, but the people had already made up their minds. The trial then took place on November 9th. A 16-year-old boy testified that he'd heard the girl scream and saw Dan walking away covered in blood. His story had some gaps, and the shirt he described didn't match the one from Dan's porch, but that didn't matter. The jury saw a huge, rough-looking man and decided he had to be the killer. Dan sat in the courtroom in a green homespun shirt, staring at the people who had turned against him. When he was given a chance to speak, he told the courtroom that he hadn't killed anyone and that anyone who said otherwise were lying. Then he said something they wouldn't forget. If they hung him, he'd haunt every one of them until they were dead, and after that, the devil would take them. Fast forward to December 11th, the town gathered to watch the hanging. It was cold and the crowd was big. Dan rode to the gallows in a wagon, sitting between the sheriff and the deputy. He was calm even as the noose was fastened around his thick neck. Just before they pulled the lever, he said, "The soul of an innocent man don't rest." Then he dropped and the execution was done. But something strange happened almost immediately. A shadow showed up on the south wall of the jail, the same wall where Dan's cell had been. It was the shape of a tall man with a robe around his neck, and people swore it looked just like Dan. It didn't fade with time. It couldn't be scrubbed off, and it showed through layer after layer of paint. Even under moonlight, it stayed visible. Crowds began to come to see it, and the jail was eventually sold and became a private residence, but people still came looking. The new owner tried to stop them by planting thick ivy along the wall. The shadow ended up still being there, hidden behind the vines, but not gone. Then, in 1949, the property changed hands once again. This time, it was turned into an office building, and during renovations, the ivy was torn down and the wall was painted over again. After that, the shadow didn't return. Around the same time, an elderly man passed away in a nearby nursing home. He had lived in Rutherfordton his whole life. People remembered that he had been the 16-year-old boy who testified at Dan's trial nearly 70 years earlier. All the others, jurors, lawyers, the sheriff, were long gone. He was the last one left. Some say it was just timing, while others say that when the last person responsible for Dan's death died, Dan's work was done, and the shadow finally left. Either way, it was gone, but the memory of it stayed. The ghost train of Boston Bridge. On the early morning of August 27, 1891, a passenger train operated by the Richmond and Danville Railroad departed Statesville, North Carolina at around 2:30 a.m., already running 34 minutes behind schedule. It was engine number 9 hauling 6 cars, among them being a baggage car, a second-class car, a first-class coach, a tender, a Pullman sleeper, and a private car reserved for the company superintendent. In an effort to make up lost time, the engineer accelerated far beyond safe limits. Barely 5 minutes after leaving the station, the train reached Boston Bridge, a wooden trestle stretching across Third Creek. As it passed over the structure, the train abruptly derailed, launching off the bridge and crashing more than 60 feet into the creek bed below. The Pullman sleeper was thrown violently from the tracks, eventually landing over 150 feet from where it had gone airborne. Those who weren't killed on impact ended up drowning in the creek as the waters were high and the terrain rough. Without a hospital in town, survivors were taken into local homes to be treated. The dead were gathered and laid out in the town's farmers' tobacco warehouse to be identified. Between 20 and 23 passengers were killed, and about 30 more were injured. A formal investigation into the disaster revealed that several rail spikes had been removed, leading some to suspect sabotage. 2 prisoners already serving time were eventually convicted after allegedly confessing to fellow inmates, though whether the confessions were legitimate or coerced remains debatable. Others blamed poor maintenance and oversight by the Richmond and Danville Railroad. But as the investigation faded from headlines, a different kind of story began to grow in its place, one that had nothing to do with missing spikes or damaged rails. 50 years later, in 1941, a couple experienced something near Boston Bridge that would transform the incident into one of North Carolina's most enduring paranormal legends. After suffering a flat tire not far from the bridge, the husband left to find help while his wife remained behind in the car. In the silence of the night, she suddenly heard the unmistakable sound of an approaching train, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks, the low mechanical groan, and a whistle that seemed out of place for the time. Looking out toward the bridge, she saw what she could only describe as an old-fashioned wooden train making its way across the trestle. The train was fully visible too, with glowing headlights and wooden rail cars, something long outdated by the 1940s. As she watched, the train careened off the bridge in the same manner as the original wreck. She heard a violent crash, screams of pain, twisted metal groaning under the weight of destruction. It wasn't just a sound either, it said that she saw bodies, broken cars, and heard the cries of people suffering. She hurried down to the creek, expecting to find wreckage and survivors, but as she got closer, everything was gone. There was no train, no debris, and no injured passengers. Instead, a car appeared on the road. It was her husband who had returned with help, and she ran to them in panic, insisting they had just missed a terrible accident. Still shaken up, she convinced them to drive into town and stop at the train station to report the wreck. When she told the ticket agent what she had seen, he calmly informed her that there had been no wreck that night, but there had been a crash exactly 50 years ago on that very day and at that very bridge. From then on, sightings of the so-called ghost train of Boston Bridge became part of the local lore. Wampus Cat. The Wampus Cat is one of the more layered and shifting figures in Appalachian and Cherokee folklore. It isn't just a cryptid in the traditional sense, but carries the weight of old spiritual beliefs, frontier storytelling, and bits of local history, changing shape depending on where the story is told. To begin though, the Cherokee tell of a woman named Running Deer whose husband Standing Bear fell victim to the Iowa, an evil spirit known to bring madness. Seeking justice, Running Deer went to the tribe's shamans, who gave her a booger mask and cloaked her in the spirit of a mountain lion. She tracked the Iowa, surprised it, and in doing so, turned its own magic against itself. According to the story, her spirit still lives on in the Wampus Cat, now a silent protector of Cherokee lands. Another version tells of a curious woman who spied on a sacred ritual while hidden under a cougar pelt. When discovered, a medicine man cursed her by fusing her with the skin, forever turning her into the creature. Outside Cherokee tradition though, Appalachian versions are a little rougher. In some, the Wampus Cat is said to be a cursed woman who dabbled in witchcraft, with her punishment turning her into something neither fully human nor fully beast. In others, it's a shapeshifter, part cat, part woman, or even part dog, capable of changing form, going invisible, and haunting the hills at dawn and dusk. In some towns, people call it the Gollywampus or the Whistling Wampus. No matter the name though, it's usually seen at the edge of the woods, in twilight or fog, with yellow eyes that follow silently. Historical references aren't completely absent either. Newspapers dating back to the early 1900s reported on sightings. For example, a 1918 article out of Greenville, Tennessee, mentioned a wampus roaming near Gethsemane Ridge. Years later, it was blamed for a string of animal deaths said to have slaughtered pigs and dogs. Locals speculated that it might be a relic from an ancient species or something not yet identified by science. Still, nothing ever surfaced to confirm what people were seeing. Descriptions also vary. Sometimes it's a cat the size of a man, covered in matted black fur, with claws like knives and a long tail that moves low to the ground. Some reports even claim it walks upright, others say it runs on all fours. A few even describe it having 6 legs, 4 for running and 2 more for fighting. What's consistent though is the feeling people report, being a sudden sharp disturbance like they're being watched. Some also claim it emits a scream so harsh it makes animals scatter and leaves people frozen where they stand. The creature's behavior is just as strange. Some stories say it cries out like a woman in distress. Others claim it goes silent and only announces itself with those glowing eyes. A few legends even give it a sort of tragic intelligence, aware of what it is and perhaps who it once was. Despite the fear it inspires though, the Wampus Cat has been embraced in popular culture. It's shown up in fantasy games, books, and even the Harry Potter universe, where its hair is said to be used in wand making. Several high schools and even a North Carolina baseball team also use the Wampus Cat as their mascot. Raven Mocker. Among the darker figures in Cherokee tradition, the Raven Mocker stands out as a being not simply feared for what it is, but for what it does. Known by several names including He Who Covers His Face, Death Caller, and Heart Eater, this spirit is believed to prey on the sick and the dying, extending its own life by stealing the remaining years from its victims. Descriptions often portray it as aged and frail in appearance, yet unnaturally powerful. It moves by night, flying through the air with outstretched limbs that resemble wings, with its body trailing sparks as if aflame. The sound of rushing wind follows its path, and the cries it releases, sharp and rasping like a raven's dive, are said to warn of impending death. These cries aren't just signs of its presence, but considered omens in themselves. The Raven Mocker doesn't wait for death to arrive on its own. It speeds the process, tormenting those on the edge of life by applying pressure to their chest, restricting breath, or even lifting them from their beds and throwing them down. Once the victim dies, the Raven Mocker is believed to extract and consume the heart. The method leaves no visible trace, no wound, no blood, but the heart is gone, and with it, the years the person might have lived. Though most people can't see them, Cherokee medicine men have long been said to possess the ability to detect and repel these spirits. It's thought that if one manages to see a Raven Mocker in its true form, the creature will die within a week. Guns Kaliski, a renowned shaman, was known for defeating multiple Raven Mockers using a specialty brewed from duckroot. This concoction, according to tradition, gave him the ability to see what others could not and protect the vulnerable from the spirit's reach. Other witches are said to avoid the Raven Mocker entirely. Its actions are not rooted in trickery or deception, but in raw, direct theft of life. It's also said that its presence disturbs even those accustomed to dark practices. The name Heart Eater is not metaphorical either. It's a reflection of what the Raven Mocker does and what it needs to survive. In one story concerning the Raven Mocker, a young hunter stumbled across what looked like an abandoned cabin. While resting there, he heard a raven's call. An elderly couple returned to the home unaware he was inside and began speaking openly about stealing lives. He watched them roast what seemed to be a human heart. The next morning, the old man offered him a gift, beadwork, and warned him to say nothing. The hunter took the gift but threw it into a nearby stream, then returned to his village and told what he had witnessed. 7 days later, the couple was found dead, and their house was burned to ensure the raven mockers were destroyed. Another account tells of 2 men prepared by a medicine man who had them fast for 7 days. They were given a remedy made from muskrat brain said to sharpen spiritual vision. With this, they were able to see spirits gathered near a grave, among them a raven mocker. They saw it digging into the ground, but when they attempted to interfere, the creature fled. The experience left them shaken and requiring healing rituals to recover from what they had seen. Another story involves a dying man whose own family refused to remain by his side out of fear the raven mockers would come. As he lay alone, people nearby claimed to hear his cries and witness strange disturbances. After his death, it was believed the raven mockers had taken his heart. They hadn't just waited for him to die, but they helped bring it about, ensuring they could take the life that remained. In another case, a medicine man was able to hold them off. As a person near death, witches, including a raven mocker, gathered outside the home. The medicine man's protection worked as the witches scattered and the raven mocker was kept away. The creature's presence has not only remained an oral tradition though. Writers have drawn on the raven mocker to craft stories of their own. It appears in Manly Wade Wellman's novel The Old Gods Waken among the strange forces faced by Silver John. In Scott Nicholson's They Hunger, set in a gorge similar to the Linville Wilderness, beings similar to the raven mocker haunt the characters. And PC Cast's House of Night series reimagines them as children of a fallen angel and human woman feeding off those near death. Merely Humans' novel The Curse of the Raven Mocker centers on a girl trying to stop a figure believed to be one of these spirits to save her mother. It even appears on television, most notably in Walker, Texas Ranger, where the creature is portrayed as a medicine man with hallucinogenic powers and shape-shifting ability. Mentions also occur in the Jane Yellow Rock series and the cryptid-focused show Mountain Monsters. The Snarly Yow. The Snarly Yow is known for being one of the more elusive and misunderstood figures tied to the Appalachian region, with accounts stretching as far back as the 1700s. It's often been described as a large, dog-like creature with sagging skin and glowing red eyes, often appearing in shades of dark blue, gray, or white. Witnesses say it has a mouth filled with unnaturally red lips or gums, and its skin hangs loose on a body set to move with surprising speed. It's believed to be able to keep pace with a horse at full gallop. When fog rolls in, the creature reportedly shifts into a less tangible form, perhaps even phasing in and out of visibility. When seen clearly though, the Snarly Yow's growl is said to be likened to something forced through clenched teeth, a sound disturbing enough to explain why it was given its Germanic name during the early settler period. What separates this entity from other Appalachian hound sightings is how it interacts with the world around it. People have claimed that bullets, rocks, and even bricks pass through it with no resistance, yet it's seen moving earth and gravel as it runs. One account describes a man on horseback giving chase as the dog tore up dirt along a mountain trail only to vanish mid-stride. Another story involves a hunter who took careful aim with a rifle and shot at close range. Though he fired directly at it, the bullets had no impact and the dog didn't even flinch. It simply stared and walked away. Despite its fearsome looks, there are no stories of it attacking people outright. Instead, it's known for blocking roads, staring down travelers, and vanishing without warning. Many of these early stories also link it to South Mountain near Hagerstown, Maryland, especially at Turner's Gap, a location already tied to violent Civil War history and older supernatural traditions. Horses are especially disturbed by its presence. More than one person has been thrown from their saddle when a horse bucked at the sight of it, including a man who broke his collarbone when the animal appeared unexpectedly on a roadside. The fear it causes doesn't really seem to require physical contact either. Some claim the Yow's gaze alone can create a feeling of dread, with a few even saying that seeing it 3 times is enough to bring about death. The Snarly Yow also hasn't stayed in the past. A new wave of sightings in the 1970s renewed interest in the creature. One man swore he struck it with his car, felt the impact, only to find it standing unharmed behind him when he stopped to look. Another reported seeing a massive dog-like shape standing upright on two legs, silent and still in the road before disappearing into darkness. But one of the more obscure accounts came from a young girl near Zittlestown, Maryland, who had no prior knowledge of local legends. She and her cousin both saw what looked like a headless, ghostly white dog with a chain collar walking across the road. The chain dragging behind it made a distinct clinking sound on the pavement. They proceeded to run, frightened not by what they'd heard about it, but by what they saw themselves. That report, made independently and without influence, added an unusual twist to the lore, one that suggests not all Snarly Yow sightings are of the same creature, or even the same type of being. The idea that there may be more than one of these creatures isn't new though, with similarities to the so-called smoke wolves of other West Virginia stories. Some have proposed that these aren't solitary apparitions, but part of a species, some natural, some supernatural. Descriptions vary, with some seeing them as more like wolves, others like ghostly hounds, and a few resembling mythic creatures like the dragon from the Never-Ending Story, but in much darker form. The Moon-Eyed People. The mountains of southern Appalachia have long carried tales of a strange and reclusive people who lived in the region before the Cherokee arrived. Described as short in stature, with pale skin, bearded faces, and large, light-sensitive eyes, these individuals were known as the Moon-Eyed People. Early accounts from settlers, explorers, and Cherokee oral tradition described them as a mysterious group who could not see well in sunlight and only emerged under cover of night. Their unusual traits, being their apparent aversion to daylight, left a strong impression on those who heard about them. The term moon-eyed is said to come from their extreme sensitivity to light. Some describe them as practically blind during the day, only able to work or move freely by moonlight or in the dark. Others speculated that their nickname referred not just to their habits, but to the large, round shape of their eyes. According to stories passed down by Cherokee elders and repeated in various sources from the late 1700s onward, these people were already living in the region when the Cherokee migrated in. The Cherokee eventually drove them out, taking over the land. The first written account to mention the Moon-Eyed People appeared in 1797 in a book by Benjamin Smith Barton. Barton had spoken with Colonel Leonard Marbury, an intermediary between native nations and the US, who told him of a Cherokee tradition describing these earlier inhabitants. Marbury claimed that the Cherokee had found the area occupied by a strange race of people who could not tolerate daylight and had expelled them. According to Barton, the story might connect to tales from other parts of the world. He even proposed that the Moon-Eyed People were similar to an albino group encountered in Panama by a Welsh explorer, Leonel Waffer, in the early 1700s. These people, too, were said to function better at night and suffered from bright sunlight. After that, later writers and local legends built on Barton's account. John Sevier, the first governor of Tennessee, claimed to have spoken to a Cherokee chief named Okonostota, who told him that the ruins at Fort Mound were built by white men who had come from across the ocean. He said these earlier inhabitants had eventually proposed peace and agreed to leave the land. Sevier also mentioned hearing about a surviving scrap of an old book said to have come from the descendants of a Welsh tribe, though that book, according to him, had been destroyed in a fire. Over time, this connection to the mythical Welsh Prince Madoc, who was believed by some to have crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus, became linked to the story. The idea that these mysterious people might have been of Welsh origin was appealing to some early settlers, especially those who wanted to assert a European claim to the Americas that predated Spanish exploration. Then, in the early 20th century, folklorist James Mooney connected Barton's story to other regional traditions and found similarities in multiple Cherokee accounts. One such story described pale, small people who once lived near the Little Tennessee River. Another involved remains of people discovered alongside tools and weapons, suggesting an earlier population that had vanished before the Cherokee arrived. Mooney also referenced the work of historian John Haywood, who in the 1820s wrote about a white race living in the Tennessee region who were wiped out or driven away. Also, physical remnants often cited in connection with the Moon-Eyed People include the low, zigzagging stone wall that stretches across Fort Mountain in northern Georgia. Though its builders remain unknown, some believe that this wall is one of the few surviving traces of the Moon-Eyed People. Archaeologists themselves estimate that the wall may have been constructed between 500 and 1500 CE, but no definitive explanation exists. The Georgia Parks Division also placed a historical marker at Fort Mountain noticing the legend. It claims the Moon-Eyed People may have built the wall and says they were eventually annihilated by the creek during a phase of the moon when they could not see. Park rangers today confirm that visitors regularly ask about the legend, and the site draws many who are curious about the mystery. Additional evidence, or what some consider to be supporting clues, has surfaced over the years. In the 1840s, a farmer in North Carolina reportedly unearthed a 3-foot-tall statue made of talc and soapstone. The object, which now resides in the Cherokee County Historical Museum, depicts two figures with rounded heads and large crescent-like eyes. The features of the statue have been interpreted by some as representing the Moon-Eyed People. In another account from 1882, the Cherokee Phoenix reported the discovery of small graves near Sparta, Tennessee. The skeletons inside measured less than 2 feet in length, with some showing signs of adult teeth worn down by use. The remains were buried with items that may have been shell tools, though what became of them remains unknown. The story has shifted and splintered in various directions. In one version, the Moon-Eyed People were seen as nocturnal cave dwellers who assisted farmers and quietly visited homesteads at night to perform tasks like gathering corn or clearing fields. Cherokee author Lynn Losiah also described them as active only in the dark, advising that people should never attempt to watch them. Those who did, she warned, might bring misfortune upon themselves. Losiah also emphasized the need to ask permission before taking anything found in the woods, suggesting that objects might belong to the little people, who, if disrespected, will throw stones or retaliate in other ways. In this telling, the Moon-Eyed or Little People were not pale or foreign, but native and spirit-like, living alongside the Cherokee and demanding respect. Other interpretations took the story in more dramatic directions. Some believe the Moon-Eyed People might have been aliens or beings not of this world. The idea that they came from underground or from another dimension gained traction among fringe theorists. Meanwhile, those focused on historical roots proposed a simpler explanation, that the story grew out of tensions between local tribes and early Welsh miners who came to the region in the 18th century. These miners worked underground in low light and had lighter skin, which could have fed the idea that they were unusually sensitive to the sun. Conflicting reports have also made it difficult to determine whether the Moon-Eyed People were a distinct group, a misremembered history, or simply part of the broader tradition of mysterious little people stories told in Appalachian and indigenous folklore. What is clear though is that stories of strange beings who lived before the Cherokee, who were driven out or vanished, have persisted across generations.